Gopijana Vallabha
The reading from the third canto, Untitled Chapter 14, entitled Pregnancy of Deity in the Evening. We are looking at text number 50. Antarbahischamanam abjanetram Swapurusechanuvrihitarupam Pautrastava Shri Lalanalamam Drashtaspurat Kundalamanditanam Antarbahischamanam abjanetram Swapurusechanuvrihitarupam Pautrastava Shri Lalanalamam Drashtaspurat Kundalamanditanam
Antarbahishchamalam abjanetram
Antarbahishchamalam abjanetram
Svapurushechanugrihita rupam
Svapurushechanugrihita rupam
Pautrastava Shri Lalanalamam
Pautrastava Shri Lalanalamam
Drashtas Purat Kundala Manditananam
Drashtas Purat Kundalam Antarbahishchamalam abjanetram Svapurushechanugrihita rupam Pautrastava Shri Lalanalamam Drashtas Purat Kundalamanditananam
Ladies,
Svapurushechanugrihita rupam Pautrastava Shri Lalanalamam Drashtas Purat Kundalamanditananam Antarbahishchamalam Pautrastava Shri Drashtas Purat Kundalamanditananam Antar
within,
within
Bahi,
Bahi
without,
without
Cha,
Cha
also, Amalam,
Amalam
spotless,
spotless
Abjanetram,
Abjanetram
lotus eyes,
lotus eyes
Swapurusha,
Svapurusha
devotee,
devotee
Icha Anugrihita, Rupam,
Rupam
accepting form, according to desire, Pautraha,
grandchild
Tava,
Tava
your, Shri Lalana, beautiful goddess of fortune, the Lamam, decorated, Drashta, will see, Spurat Kundala, with brilliant earrings, Mandita, decorated, Ananam, face. Your grandson will be able to see, inside and outside, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, whose wife is the beautiful goddess of fortune. The Lord can assume the form desired by the devotee, and his face is always beautifully decorated with earrings. Purport. It is predicted herewith that the grandson of Diti, Prahlad Maharaj, would not only see the personality of God within himself by meditation, but would also be able to see him personally with his eyes. This direct vision is possible only for one who is highly elevated in Krishna consciousness. For the Lord is not possible to see with material eyes. The Supreme Personality of Godhead has multifarious eternal forms, such as Krishna, Baladev, Sankarshan, Aniruddha, Pradyumna, Vasudev, Narayan, Ram, Nrsimha, Varaha, and Vamana. And the devotees of the Lord knows all those Vishnu forms. A pure devotee becomes attached to one of the eternal forms of the Lord, and the Lord is pleased to appear before him in the form desired. A devotee does not imagine something whimsical about the form of the Lord, nor does he ever think that the Lord is impersonal and can assume a form desired by the non-devotee. The non-devotee has no idea of the form of the Lord, and thus he cannot think of any one of the above-mentioned forms. But whenever a devotee sees the Lord, he sees him in the most beautifully decorated form, accompanied by his constant companion, the goddess of fortune, who is eternally beautiful. Om Bhagavata Janandana Shalakaya Chakshurmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guru Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manavisham Stapitam Yena Bhutade Swayam Rupa Gadamaya Dadati Swapadantakam Vandeham Shri Shri Yuta Shri Guru Vaishnavascha Shri Rupam Samadvatam Sagaranatam Vitam Tansajivam Sadvendam Sadvatam Parajana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Rama Krishna Vatam Samanavalitam Shri Shakam Vitamsha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinamandru Jagapate Gopisha Vatamantara Kantam Muslim Tapta Kanchana Radhe Vrindavaneshware Vrishabhano Sudadevi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavyo Jai Shri Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shrivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, The grandson were able to see inside and outside the supreme personality of Godhead. His wife is the beautiful goddess of The Lord can assume the form desired by the devotee, and his face is always beautifully decorated with earrings. So we see here the extended description of the glories of Prahlad Maharaj. Somehow or other, even though Diti had made a great mistake or was overwhelmed by material desire and improper action in the course of her pregnancy, which led to the birth of Hiranyakashipu, then we see at the same time how she was also very chaste, very faithful, and very respectful to the sages. And therefore her grandson was then also blessed with all the wonderful qualities that she exhibited. And we see here a whole description of how Prahlad ultimately will be endowed with the most amazing qualities, and the conclusion of which is that he will be able to see the form of the Lord, which that is the most amazing thing. And no one is able to see the form of the Lord without being greatly pure and very fortunate. So we see how Prahlad was then explained to be all his qualities lead, or the conclusion of that, the climax of that, is that he will be able to see the Lord personally. And we will see in the 7th canto, when we reach that, probably in a few years, that we will see how Prahlad, the details of his activities. Prahlad is interesting because I think it is, aside for the cantos that deal with, the 10th canto that deal with Krishna, most of the chapters, I think this is the pastime in the Bhagavatam that there's the most chapters dedicated to it. So the story of Prahlad is very significant. And we see in the previous verse, we see Prabhupada said some interesting things about why is it that Prahlad will be able to see the Lord? Because these pure devotees, they ultimately are supposed to set a certain kind of example for us by which we can live. We naturally live by imitation. That's just the reality in life. That's why your parents, for example, form such a big part of your karma as your parents. Because a child by nature just imitates what their parents does. It's unavoidable. And it's not really even rational. It's just something that's built in you. Just like the language that you speak. It's just something that just comes out. A child just absorbs it like a sponge. It's not that the child has to be taught grammar or language. Later, if you want to learn a second language, it takes a little time. It's a little tricky. Then you have to really sit, and it takes a lot of energy to learn it. And it's almost the same for us also in learning devotional service. Most of us, our first language is not Vaishnavism. Our first language is something else. And then you have to come later, and then you have to learn Vaishnavism. It's a little complicated. And you have to get your grammar books, and you have to study, and you have to write tests, and you have to practice. And then later, if you're lucky, maybe at some point you can speak Vaishnavism fluently. But it's a little tricky. So we see Prahlad was very unique in that he was born. We see that Prahlad was born a totally pure devotee. And in the 7th canto, we have this great opposition, on the one hand, between Prahlad Maharaj, who was just a born pure devotee, completely free from any tinges of material desire. Shri Radha Govinda Deva ki. And also, we see then on the other hand, Hiranyakashipu, who was just totally born a demon, like fully, 100% demon, very strongly so. And Hiranyakashipu, we know, is not an ordinary demon. He is actually a transcendentally empowered demon. Because he was sent for the specific purpose of being extraordinary demon. So therefore, no one can be as great a demon as he is. Most demons in the world, even nowadays, they will have some good maybe mixed in them, or some doubt, or maybe a little bit humility every now and again in their life. But Hiranyakashipu was just 100% pure demon for that purpose of being so greatly powerful. But then that is how we learn. The Bhagavatam gives us these examples. So because we learn by being exposed, and therefore that is then also the great danger of modern culture, is that we become exposed to so many things nowadays. It's very sad actually, because people don't understand what happens if you just get exposed to how certain people live. You start to imitate that, whether you want to or not, just in the way people speak, in the way people act. Now, if we look at some of Prahlad's qualities, the previous verse, very interesting. Prabhupada says something very amazing. He says that Prabhupada said that Prahlad had all the good qualities humanly possible. And he says here that the most important characteristic of a pure devotee is that he is not lampata or licentious. And another quality is that he is always eager to mitigate the miseries of suffering humanity. So that is an amazing statement. I mean, Prabhupada made that there. How the amazing thing with Prahlad was, even though he was born into great opulence and royal power, and later he himself also became the king, he was not licentious, lampata. So lampata means licentious, Prabhupada translates it. And licentious means it comes from the root of licentious is related to the same root as liberty. So it means free, means being free or basically being unrestrained. So that is the amazing thing we see with Hiranyakashipu. Even though he was greatly determined, but at the end, when he became the emperor, what do we see? He was drunk the whole time, and he was licentious, completely unrestrained, which is what we see. That's the big difference between the demon and the devotee. So being unrestrained or uncontrolled is, Prabhupada says, that is, one sense, the most important characteristic of a pure devotee is that he is not lampata, that he is not like that. Because the nature of a devotee is that he is controlled by Krishna, to be surrendered. So this restraint is then very interesting. And if we look at the 7th canto, we see then, on the one hand, Prahlad Maharaj, who is by nature totally focused and controlled by his love for Krishna. And we see Hiranyakashipu, who was by nature extremely determined, but totally just uncontrolled, and just completely not controlled. We see that even Hiranyakashipu, oftentimes what the demons would do is that it's not just that they want to be in control, they even want to break down morality and dharma. They want to reverse even the results. It says Hiranyakashipu, he reversed the results of pious and sinful actions. And he wanted to completely break down that any kind of restraint that is there by the considerations of dharma. Because that's what dharma is, to a large part. Means restraint. Some things are dharmic, some things are not dharmic. The moment you have a dharmic culture, it means that you understand there's such a thing as sin, there's such a thing as piety. And that immediately means you have to be restrained by that. But we see that the demoniac mind hates that idea of being restrained. The demoniac mind wants total unrestraint. And they think that somehow, if there's no restraint, then that is the perfection of life. But what we then see in the later chapters of the 7th canto is that then we have a whole discussion on Varnashram, which is interesting. So you first have the whole story of Prahlad Maharaj, showing these two extremes, and then you have the reality of Varnashram. And it's interesting because we find ourselves somewhere in between. We are not pure devotees by birth. We are a little bit in between, somewhere in between Prahlad and Hiranyakashipu. And wherever you fall on the spectrum, that's where we fall. And then Varnashram is then supposed to elevate us systematically. Because what do you do if you're not born a pure devotee? It means you're going to have to work a little bit on it. You're going to have to practice some discipline and some self-restraint if you want to elevate yourself to a higher platform. So then we see then a whole discussion on Varnashram. The idea is that this systematic elevation of one's character, even if one is specifically relevant for those who are not born with pure character, and it then has to be reformed. So, but it is amazing that Prabhupada says here how licentiousness or being unrestrained is that is the main characteristic that basically, and if we look at Varnashram in this way, then we see also that it is basically a systematic development of the ability to restrain oneself, to control the mind. We see Rupa Goswami in the first chapter of the Nectar of Instruction, first verse, also explaining how that is the basis of spiritual life, and is to control the urges of the tongue, the belly, the genitals, the speech, anger, and the mind. And that is the basic principle. And then Varnashram or yoga, there's various strategies that one can employ in trying to restrain oneself. And then our culture then explains, ultimately, the ultimate restraint is only there by love for Krishna. So therefore, if we look at Prahlad, we will see that a completely focused individual, because he was completely dedicated to Krishna's lotus feet, and therefore restraint and control came as a natural consequence. But for us, we need to work on it. So Prabhupada elsewhere in the 8th canto of the Bhagavatam, in the chapter between, in the conversation between Vamanadev and Bali Maharaj, when Vamana approached Bali, and who was Bali? What was Bali's relationship with Prahlad? Yeah, so Bali again was Prahlad's grandson, who was again a demon. He was again then somewhere in between. So he was a demon, but then he had some affinity for Lord Vishnu in his heart. It's explained because he was Prahlad's grandson, there was some piety in him. But he himself had also conquered the heavenly planets. And then when Vamanadev approached him, and Vamanadev asked him for 3 steps of land, then Bali was shocked. And he said, but my dear boy, you don't understand your own benefit. And then Vamana started to lecture him and explain to him how he should only ask what he needs. And he explained to him the virtues of practicing satisfaction. And basically telling him that I'm a brahmachari, I only really need 3 steps of land. And if I cannot be happy with 3 steps of land, then even if I get the whole universe, it will not satisfy me. And Prabhupada says that indirectly, he was criticizing Bali Maharaj, telling him, why have you taken the whole universe? Also giving an indication that now I will take it back. And then Prabhupada says something very interesting. He says, this is from the purport of the 17th verse of the 19th chapter of the 8th canto. It says, Lord Vamanadev indirectly indicated to Bali Maharaj that he was occupying more land than he needed. In the material world, all distresses are due to extravagance. One acquires money extravagantly and also spends it extravagantly. Such activities are sinful. So all the stresses are due to extravagance, extravagance in living. And with that we see licentiousness basically leads to extravagance, not being restrained in the ability in which one spends money and the ability in which one earns money. Amazing how Prabhupada says all the stress is due to this. Once when Prabhupada was in, where was it? I think it was in New Talavan, or one of these farm projects, not the bigger ones, one of the smaller ones, that some of the devotees were farming there. And when Prabhupada was walking there, he was very impressed by how they were living. And then he says, yes, these devotees, they have solved all problems in life. He says all other problems, he says birth, death, disease, and old age, he says those are the problems that are there. Anything else is man-made. He says everything beyond that is made by humans. He says those 4 problems you cannot solve. In the material world, you're going to get old and you're going to die, and that will be ever present. But any other problems that you have, he says that is man-made. That is due to a man-made system. And he says these devotees, they basically solve all the problems that can be solved. So why is that? Because no extravagance, no extravagant living. Therefore save so much problems. So it's amazing how in the modern world, our whole culture, specifically in the US, but now what is spread all over the world, it basically rests. The foundation of it is extravagant living. The reason why the US economy rests on extravagant living. So many industries, they only exist because of people having unnecessary luxuries. And it generates billions of dollars of profit. But that is a whole society that is based on passion. So it runs on consumption, and then and that's what makes people work hard. But that just causes so much misery, and that's what we see. The mode of passion is characterized by intense hankering, intense endeavor, and misery. These three, they go together. Because now, why does extravagance lead to misery? Because you will have the stress in now working hard to be able to afford everything. And you will also have the stress in the consequences of how you spend your money. So many of these intense experiences, they also ultimately cause your body to break down, whatever it is. Whether it is, even if you go to a theater, you go to a cinema, watch a movie. Even then, if you haven't done it for many years, especially if you're a devotee, and then one day, okay, someone says, there's a movie, it's sort of Krishna conscious, like say, I don't know, something like Avatar or whatever, and then you're like, okay, I'll go watch it. And you go watch it, you haven't been in the theater for maybe 4 years, and you go sit and you watch it, and you realize how intense it actually is, loud sounds, it's like what it does even to your nervous system. So even something as simple as that actually puts a toll on the mind and the senses. What to speak about the other things people can do for pleasure. So all these intense experiences, they also lead to more and more misery. And what is fascinating is just how powerful it is if you are able to not live extravagantly. Like I read there's a big movement now also, interestingly enough, on the internet, where people are really realizing the virtues and the power of frugality. And they realize how the general person, how much he wastes. So there's this interesting blog I read about a guy. He says that him and his wife, they got work as software engineers. And then after 10 years, they retired. He retired with $1 million in his bank account. He says he didn't win the lotto. He didn't do any kind of risky stocks or do anything. He didn't have any other form of income. All he did is they only lived on half of what they earned. And the other half, he just put away every month. And in 10 years, you could retire. Amazing. And if you do the maths, if you take $5,000 and you put it away every year for 10 years, you're going to have about $820,000 after only 10 years. And if you take 4% of about $820,000, then you're going to get, which is a very sort of conservative estimate of how much interest you can earn on a big chunk of cash like that if you put it in the right way. You're going to get about $32,000 a year from that. And that's what he did. He worked just 10 years. He started working when he was 23. At the age of 33, he retired. And now he's just retired. And now he's just basically started this big blog, and he's just telling people how much money you waste. And that how, if you start making the calculations, like it says, if you buy a Starbucks, so just, whatever, it costs like $10. If you spend $10 a day, 6 days a week, that's $60. So it's about $240 a month. If you take that $240 a month over a 10-year period, and you would take that $240 and put it away, then after 10 years, it's going to be about $108,000, $50,000 of which is interest. So amazing, he's making these calculations to show how much waste, the average things that we do, but because we're only seeing so short term. Now he's looking at obviously just in terms of money, and showing the power of if you don't waste money, how much less you have to work. Because his point is he only had to work 10 years to be where most people have to work 30 or 40 years. And then the dream is then you retire when you're old. And then what can you do when you're old? But how much of it comes from waste? Just by wasting so many things, how in the end you end up working so much more. In the end, you end up wasting so much of your time. But the devotee has that same vision. The devotee understands the value of even little moments. Because the devotee understands that these things have to be invested in Krishna's service. What to speak about investing for early retirement? Think about investing in what is eternal, both time and money. So we see that Prabhupada, he was also really had that vision of not wasting, the power of not wasting, and the power of saving small things. Prabhupada says also the same with his books. How was he able to write those books? How was he able to write? Prabhupada said, same thing. He says it is like water on stone. Every day, a little bit. Every day, a little bit. Just every day, just a few verses. But you just do it every day, and after 10 years, you see what it amounts to. So most people think in the modern world, a lot of what is projected to us is people who attain success by some amazing strike, some amazing fortune, or some big thing that happens. They get a big break, and then they somehow get a job and they become famous, or they somehow inherit a lot of money, or they somehow do something amazing, and then it's like this big success. And most people are thinking that the success of their life is depending on some sort of special thing that has to happen. But if you look at Prabhupada's example, or you look at the example of this person, they're both saying, listen, it is, for most people, your success is not going to be that. Your success is going to rest on the consistent investment in small measured chunks, and in not wasting unnecessarily. Then even the ordinary person, even the average person can become successful. And that's what we see in devotional service also. You take up some regular service, whatever your situation in life is, and you hold on to that service, and you continue performing that service for 10, 15, 20 years, even if it is just a little bit, and then you will become extraordinary. And that is the amazing vision of Krishna consciousness, that to become extraordinary does not rest on necessarily doing something amazing, but it rests on that steady execution of service. We see that Prabhupada also, he was most impressed. Prabhupada was most impressed when people were able to take steady service. When they could be steady in their service, Prabhupada really appreciated that immensely. And because he understood that is the value, that is the thing that will lead to success. I read Burijan Prabhu also. He was saying how after he moved out of the ashram, he had to start a business, and he started a business importing handbags, something into Australia. And Burijan also had this plan that, he's going to make a lot of money. He has a plan, make a big business, and then he's going to do something amazing, like build a big temple or build something amazing, whatever. So, but once you start doing business, you realize that business goes like this, up and down. Sometimes there's a lot, sometimes there's nothing. And he realized that maybe he won't one day, have $1 million that he can give to Prabhupada's movement. So what he realized then is, instead of having some plan that one day I'm going to give a lot, he started to just take a small percentage. Every single time he got some money from anything, from wherever someone gives you something, if your grandmother gives you some money for your birthday, whatever it is, he takes a little chunk of that and he puts it away. Because he realized that's the only way that you can know for sure. So it's that same principle, that you want to make sure you give to Krishna. But steadiness and not wasting is actually the trick. So, and that basically is cutting against the mode of passion. The mode of passion thinks that the solution to life is supposed to be intense, whereas the mode of goodness understands that passion itself is the problem. Passion is the thing that causes this desire to break through barriers, break through boundaries. And that consistent activity and a certain sense of regulation really leads to the most powerful results, which is available then to even the ordinary person, to even those of us who don't have some karma to do something extraordinary. But you see in America, I find it amazing how, and if you walk in the city, there is some pressure to do something extraordinary, to feel that I have to do something extraordinary. But the reality is that who is going to do something extraordinary? Most people aren't, from a material perspective, necessarily going to do something extraordinary. Because the reality is that most of us are ordinary. That's the very nature of average. Most people are actually average, just average, just normal people. Not super intelligent, not super beautiful, not super rich, just sort of somewhere mostly in the average spectrum. So to do something extraordinary for Krishna, is the goal of life. But that extraordinariness, we see that Prabhupada showed what that really means. And it does not necessarily mean that, you play the madanga so loud that you bang a hole in the thing, or, you do something amazing like that everybody looks, wow. No. The conquering the heart of Krishna is extraordinary. Conquering the heart of the spiritual master is extraordinary. But it is not necessarily done. The mode of passion ultimately actually will hamper your chances of doing that. Because we see that oftentimes when you come with too much passion, you become a shooting star. And like for 10 years or for 5 years, you do so many things and then you just disappear one day because of not being able to be steady. So that steadiness, you understand, is at the root of what we do. And then based on that, whatever karma we have, maybe we have some amazing abilities, naturally engage these and do something amazing. But the most of your success will come from the consistent execution of the fundamentals. That is where the most of your success will really lie. And then sometime you may do something extraordinary. Like we know the story of, what's his name, Mahavishnu Maharaj. So there was in 1974, 1972, the big London Rath Yatra. So he had just inherited a lot of money, say £100,000 from his uncle, the rich uncle. So he just inherited, or an aunt, I can't even remember. He just inherited this massive wad of cash. And then he was a brahmachari. He said, what's the best thing I can do with this money? Let me spend it on Rath Yatra. And he said, he was just walking around with like £100 notes in his pocket, just like paying for everything. And just, he basically funded the whole Rath Yatra. So that was extraordinary. Somehow he had extraordinary karma of just, a big chunk of cash coming his way, and he just spent it all for Krishna, and he will eternally, benefit from that. But, so that is like a little bonus that came. But realistically, it's what you do over a 40, 50-year period that will determine the success in your spiritual life. So Prabhupada says here, that Prahlad was alampata. He was restrained or chaste. And therefore Prabhupada says, along with that, he was also merciful. That's the interesting relationship between the two. When we get involved in extravagance, we don't just cause misery in our own life, but we also become totally immune or insensitive to the suffering of others. Because your own life becomes so complicated. Your own life becomes filled with so many intense experiences and filled with so much intense enjoyment, and with the result of intense suffering and misery and problems that come from living in the mode of passion, that you completely do not have any space in your mind for the suffering of other people. So one of the results of being restrained and simplifying your life and being careful to avoid extravagance is that immediately you become also more sensitive and perceptive. And then you start understanding also what other people are experiencing. So Prabhupada explained that is the root cause of the mode of Kali Yuga. The start of Kali Yuga was when Maharaj Parikshit was cursed by Shringi. Prabhupada says that at that point we see that there originated contempt from the higher classes towards the lower classes. And that contemptuousness that exists between the privileged classes and the unprivileged classes, it has just continued to increase and increase and increase. And we will see that it will just go bigger and bigger and bigger. Those people who have a lot, the privileged classes, they just totally isolate themselves. They live in their isolated worlds. And in those worlds, they only have their whole life, their whole psyche is just absorbed in their own little sphere of activity, and unable to understand how many other people are also suffering. So amazing to see. And that separation, that split between the classes, between the higher classes and the lower classes, will ultimately lead, Prabhupada says, to the lower classes. They will become so neglected and so wretched that then at a certain point they just rise up and they eat everyone. They just consume everything. And you see that slogan. It says, "Eat the rich." You see it sometimes graffitied all over the place. So that is the nature of what happens. Extravagance, your heart becomes as hard as a piece of rock. But you don't even realize it. Because you are so concerned with your immediate family, your immediate people around you. But your heart is completely solid as a rock when it comes to the general person. It becomes to other people who are not within your bubble and within your sphere. So, but Prahlad was not like that. So because he was restrained, because he was not afflicted by extravagance. His heart was naturally conscious of other people and their experience. In the Manu Samhita, there's a chapter that deals with the duties of a king. And it said that there's one whole chapter, the whole section deals with the duties of a king, and then there's one chapter, and that chapter is on punishment. And then there's all this poetry, these verses that extol the virtue of punishment. And it says how punishment, it is only safe at night because punishment is stalking around like a lion. It's like walking in the streets, obviously figuratively, meaning that the reason why you can sleep safely in your house is because people know that if they come break into your house, they will get punished. And they say how punishment, the only reason why conditioned souls are able to be concerned, or what's the word? Not concerned means like considerate. The only reason why conditioned souls are considerate of other people is because of the threat of punishment. If there is no punishment, by nature, people will not care how their actions influence other people. It's only because there's some danger of punishment that the people will do it. So that is the nature of conditioned souls. If they're not threatened, and we see now that more and more laws in society have to be created to protect society from people's selfishness. Like the government has to be on top of corporations the whole time, otherwise they will just completely destroy the environment. And you have, I know one devotee, his wife, she works for a government entity that just makes sure that corporations follow the guidelines in terms of not like polluting the environment. Because the laws are there, but if no one is like on top of them and looking at them and threatening to find them, they're not going to do it. They're going to naturally not follow it. So, and we see that the same thing is there. The police have to more and more, they unfortunately have to resort to more and more violence because people are also becoming more violent and uncontrollable. But then there's the backlash. So it causes so much tension in society because people are by nature more and more selfish. So that is also one of the consequences of passion. And if there's less extravagance and people by nature more restrained, then by nature people are more considerate of one another. And then it doesn't have to rest on so much enforcement and law and violence to ultimately try to keep people to a certain extent civil. These are all the consequences of living in a society in which passion is totally unrestrained. So then, that is then our challenge in each stage of life, to understand that to become alampita, to become restrained, or one could say chaste, to become really focused, to avoid extravagance and to focus our desires on what is ultimately important in our life. And that is systematically practiced. And in different stages of life, it will take different forms. So one of the nice verses in the 7th chapter that explain how for each of the ashrams, how there is a different kind of abominable activity. It says how it is abominable for a householder to renounce his duties. It is abominable for a brahmachari to renounce his vows. It is abominable for a vanaprastha to again become entangled in village gossip, to become entangled in social affairs. And it's abominable for a sannyasi to have any desire for sense gratification. It's interesting how we see that there's these various ashrams, but it all rests on the same principle of avoiding, of becoming chaste and becoming focused. But in each ashram of life, there's a different kind of duty, a different set of duties that we take up. But the goal of all these duties is exactly the same. So the key is then to understand our immediate challenge and to rise to that challenge with the ultimate goal in mind. And keeping the examples of these amazing pure devotees, of the Mahajanas, like Prahlad Maharaj, keeping that before us and understanding that this is really the example that is set for us. And becoming absorbed in the vision of the Bhagavatam will allow us to see our life very differently. And understanding also that great caution and care has to be there, because we have to understand that we are living in a very society in which certain things are considered normal, just actually completely irrational and completely detrimental. Even as simple as just buying a Starbucks coffee every day is actually something that's completely ridiculous and that will in the long run lead to so much unnecessary waste. But it's considered so normal. And so many other examples of there, how the general trend in Kali Yuga is waste and extravagance has become normalized. But the devotee, and that is the great virtue of spending time in a temple, is you realize how simple one can actually live. And then one day either staying in the temple or then being able to, when you have to set up your own life, to really keep that in mind and to realize that by avoiding extravagance, great virtue and great potential is there to avoid a lot of unnecessary misery in life. So let us hear if there are any questions or any comments on anything that has been said today. Matanga Prabhu. Yes. Which one is that, Maharaj? The class was on 3:14:50. Yeah. That was on the previous verse. Yeah.
Haribo.
Yes.
Hare Krishna, Harivilas Prabhu, thank you for the inspiring lecture. A lot of substance. Just wanted to share a few thoughts that came to my mind when you were speaking. I remember when I was reading Isha Upanishad once, the Ishavasyam verse, and in my mind was going on. The thought was, imagine if many people just understand this simple principle, which is coming just from one verse. So many problems will be solved. So much anxiety will disappear. Just if people understand that they're thieves, basically, because they're having more than necessary.
Yeah.
And for ourselves also, because there is always so much trouble when you're having more, when you're eating more than necessary, when you're having more money, and there's always so much anxiety because we are not the proprietors, because only Krishna is. So that's a very nice, very relieving thought, and when you understand something like this. Then another thing I wanted to share on your being simple and frugal point. I was reading also one time, there was this article that came from Google, somewhere I found it, where they were explaining how much we are wasting, for example, just by keeping our appliances on standby, just having that red dot. There's so much waste, you can save like so much money if you just turn off your TV completely and your charger and whatnot. We have so many appliances in our daily life, and it's becoming even more and more modern, and we're getting used to just keeping them on. So much waste. And imagine if we add to that some lights which we are leaving in the bathroom or in the closet, and computer left. So much money we can save, which is all money that we can use for preaching and for bettering the building. Just a random thought like this. And thank you. That's what I wanted to share. And also, very interesting point that you made about the Rajasic mind, which is always thinking about doing something extraordinary, but you don't need to be that person. I mean, you can just become a hero doing little by little, and in the long run, that's also a very refreshing thought.
Thank you. Thank you, Matanga. Yeah, in South Africa, it's interesting how all the outlets, like every outlet has a switch next to it, so you can turn off the whole outlet. But in America, there's no switch. It's just the outlet is there. With every plug in, it's always going to be on. It's one of the first things I realized when I came here. Aiden. Yeah.
Hare Krishna. The point of something I was taught was, don't try to be a great devotee, just be a good devotee. And sometimes, at least me in my youthful nature, I have that desire to be the best devotee I can. So how do I properly balance? Because I don't want to become Lampata. I don't want to be someone who's, maybe not too strictly following something, but also I don't want to be someone who's so rigid in trying to be like the best devotee ever. So, maybe through your experience, do you have anything you can share on how to properly balance these things?
Well, I think there's nothing wrong with, our goal is to become pure devotees. So when I'm saying that, my point was more of adjusting what it means, adjusting the idea of your success. Like success means a lifelong fidelity to the practice of Krishna consciousness, to a very strict level. There's nothing wrong with being strict. It's not that, oh, I'm so strict, oh, actually, I'm just in Maya, it's all my passion is basically wanting me to be strict, so therefore I can just relax. No, it's more, the point was more like, look at what Prabhupada valued. That is my point. Prabhupada valued very strictness in practice, but he valued steadiness, steady service was for him much more, that was something he very valued a lot. Whereas we sometimes think that our success is in becoming something, one could say, a spiritualized version of becoming like a football player or something, Like when you're in school, there's always like this idea of what it means to be popular and cool. And like the cool kids, they do this, and like they're very good at football, or they're very beautiful, or whatever it is. And then sometimes when we enter into devotional service, we carry this in, and then we think, okay, I remember one devotee, this person I met, he's like, oh, I'm gonna learn how to play the trumpet, because then I can be on stage and I can travel with my spiritual master. And it's like, that is not necessarily the most intelligent way to spend your time. So it's more like adjusting your understanding of what will really bring you Krishna's mercy. What will bring you Krishna's mercy is, as we say, like a lifelong, steady investment in Krishna consciousness, where you can consistently stick to that service regardless of what happens, and not necessarily in doing something externally extraordinary, like becoming, learning Sanskrit and giving amazing classes, or becoming the best Mridanga player in the Northeast, or being able to lead kirtans that just give people goosebumps. It's not, maybe we can't do any of these things, you understand? That was my point, that it doesn't depend on doing something materially extraordinary, even for Krishna. The real thing is to have whatever you have and consistently invest that in Krishna's service. That will bring and whatever the result of that will be, that depends on Krishna. Who knows? Maybe you will be intelligent. Maybe you will do something extraordinary. But that's not the real success is not in the results or the visible manifestation of it. The real success is in that sincere, consistent dedication and investment in Krishna's service. That is what will ultimately conquer the heart of the spiritual master and conquer Krishna's heart. And even if you are, like Prabhupada said there's one letter that he wrote, that he said how people, even if you go out every day on book distribution, he says, even if you don't distribute a single book, he says that's not a problem. He says still, because you're going out and trying every day, you will get the mercy, just like the other person who distributes 100 books. So that's the vision of Krishna consciousness. The results, in one sense, it's not the determining factor, but it is the sincerity with which you offer it. Now, naturally, if you do have certain abilities or talents, and you're not engaging that in Krishna's service, then that also is cheating. Like if you are lazy and you think, oh, I'm just going to do something. Just going to serve breakfast every morning, and then, that's what I'm going to do for 50 years, and then that's it. That's also lazy. Like you have to, whatever you have to give. But the point is that you sometimes feel this kind of pressure to do something extraordinary in a Krishna conscious sense. Whereas the real extraordinary thing to be done is to be consistent and steady and execute those basic things consistently. They will have the most result. That will ultimately lead to the most powerful result. And the basic principles of Krishna consciousness, when very seriously practiced, they will lead one to a certain sense of empowerment. And then Krishna will decide what we can do and what we can't do. But we oftentimes sacrifice. The mode of passion will oftentimes lead us to chase for some big things. And then we sacrifice the foundational things. And that's when you step into a weird area that becomes a little risky. For example, I know there was one devotee, devotees in South Africa, very powerful, few devotees, very powerful book distributors, and they bought a van, and they filled the whole van up with books, And then they traveled from one side of the country to the other side of the country. And just as they went, they were just distributing books. And when they came to the other side of the country, they just bought a temple, just like bought a building straight up, you know. And then they just preached and they did these amazing things. And it was just, you know, it was these kind of people. But with this interesting, then what happened is all three of them, ultimately, they fell down. And one of them was interesting, very amazing person, just someone who just had that Shakti, you know. Like in school, he was also just the coolest guy in the school, and then he became a Hare Krishna, and he was just the coolest Hare Krishna. And but at the end, he fell down with a young girl, underage girl actually. And but then I was speaking with someone. They said what's interesting about him is that he on Ekadasis he always ate grains. He just said, I don't have time for this. Like, Ekadasi nonsense, like I'm working, I'm doing stuff, you know. So he just neglected even these basic rules. He thought these things are just it's unnecessary. It's for the normal devotees. It's not for the powerful devotees, you know. I'm gonna eat my Rice Krispies or whatever because, you know, I have some work to do. So that is an example of passion, huh? So you think that I'm gonna get Krishna's, I distribute this, I did all these amazing external things. But if you're neglecting those basic principles, then you're on a very unsteady platform. And ironically enough, you're not going to get as much mercy as you could have, because you're going to get sidetracked. The mode of passion is going to whack you. You're going to do something stupid, and then you're going to cause a lot of misery in your life that has to be digested. So the point is, do not sacrifice the foundation for the perceived external things, because that's what the mode of passion does. But understand that the majority of our success rests on the consistent execution of the foundations of Krishna consciousness, which is also exactly what Prabhupada explained to us. Yeah? Prabhupada, he valued amazing things, and he had people who did great things, and they got a lot of mercy for it. But Prabhupada was always so consistent in reminding people that do not neglect the foundation, because that foundation is really the thing that is going to ultimately have the most effect. Chanting those 16 rounds every day for the next 40 years, that is the thing that's going to make a massive difference. So that's more the point of having that vision, understanding what carries the most in the scale. But trying to be strict and trying to be, being very serious about a spiritual life, that doesn't have to be hampered. It means, but having the vision of what that means, what the real thing is that will make the difference. Okay, we went a little over time, so we'll end here. Grantara Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki, Go Premanande.